Hey, everything you need to know about the tragedy of Julius Caesar before you start reading it. Let's start out by just asking the obvious question on everybody's mind. Why is Shakespeare so difficult to read? Why is it so hard to understand? Well, we're dealing with an older style of English, but it is more than that. You have to look at the tragedy of Julius Caesar and all of Shakespeare's plays more like an extended piece of poetry. Has a very specific format that it's following most of the time. It's called iambic pentameter. And without getting too technical, an I-A-M-B, is called a poetic foot with a stress on certain syllables. And there's 2 syllables in a foot. And a pentameter would mean that there are 5 of these feet in a line with 2 syllables in each. So every single line in the play, for the most part, there's some exceptions, has 10 syllables, and you can read them with the stresses in a certain way. So if you count them, let's just read a line from the play, and we'll stress the syllables and count. What a blunt fellow is this grown to be. 10 syllables. So in college, when you read Shakespeare plays, if you're one of those nerdy English majors like, you know, me, you would analyze the structure of all kinds of poems. And so it would read like this. What a blunt fellow is this grown to be. And sometimes in class, we'd even clap with the syllables. So Shakespeare is working in the structure where he has to fit 10 syllables in every line. So you see some funky things going on to make that happen, right? So for one, some characters' lines start near the right margin because they're attached to the previous character's line so that together they add up to 10 syllables. And another thing Shakespeare would do is he would shorten words, right? So instead of a 2-syllable word, he would shorten it into 1. So instead of saying never, he would drop the V and put in an apostrophe so it would read ner. Now that's 1 syllable. Ta-da, it's magic. And he would collapse words and phrases to make it fit. And he'd also expand words if he needed an extra syllable. So if you ever see an accent mark over the suffix ed, you'd pronounce it. So walked, which is 1 syllable, becomes walked, 2 syllables. So you have an extra syllable added. Also, if there wasn't a word he wanted, he would make up a word. So many words have become a part of the English language that Shakespeare made up, like addiction, arch-villain, and assassination. There's like 1,700 words connected to him. And he'd do this by making nouns into adjectives, verbs into nouns, connecting words together that weren't together before, stuff like that. He took what I'd call poetic license. And you can't not mention that Shakespeare was just smart. Some of the vocabulary is higher level and difficult, and if you don't have the knowledge and experience and depth of vocabulary that you develop as you become more educated, then you're going to struggle more with the text. Just the nature of this, kind of writing. And as a reader, you have to juggle and struggle with all of these things in order to understand the play, especially the first read through. I mean, the first time you go through a Shakespeare play or watch it, you're lucky to get like a quarter of it. It's hard. If you just sat there and watched it for the first time, it would be really tough. So at this point, I've read this play a lot, so I understand a lot of it. And in the Tragedy of Julius Caesar, there's a couple things that we have to know going into the play. Now, first, this is a tragedy, so it's not going to end well, right? In Shakespeare's tragedies, not that there's not some humor, there is, but just like in Romeo and Juliet, by the end of the play, a good number of the characters are going to be dead. This is true in this play, but that's not a surprise because this play dramatizes events leading up and following the assassination of Julius Caesar. So Shakespeare took some real historical names and events and some historical details and creates the story around them. So what's useful to know historically kind of helps us understand the play. So these events came about because Rome was a republic for several centuries, a long time, controlled by a senate that was made up of the wealthy and had like 600 members who controlled all the domestic and foreign policy. They were in charge, and this was like a valued and cherished tradition of Roman government. And without going into it too much, Julius Caesar grew in power and in authority, kind of crushing his political and military opponents, and basically was installed as Rome's dictator, which set him against a portion of the Senate that felt he was posing too much of a threat to their power and the long-standing tradition of Roman government which they loved. So on March 15, 44 BC, over 60 senators, including some high-profile individuals, stabbed him to death at the Senate House. And their act led to a civil war in Rome that lasted over 10 years. Shakespeare imagined what some of the conversations and political maneuvering leading up to the events would look like, and added some suspense and dramatized some of the immediate fallout surrounding the murder. But I should probably add and throw this in here, that this play isn't just about history, even though it uses historical events to tell a story. The story is really about themes like loyalty and trust and manipulation, relationships, stuff we all deal with every day. We've experienced gossip and people trashing people's reputation in order to gain something for themselves. We've experienced betrayal and someone stabbing us in the back, hopefully metaphorically. So the heart of the play, like all of Shakespeare's plays, deals with what we deal with just being human beings. So to me, that's one of the main reasons we still read and study Shakespeare, that theaters still put on his plays, and that they're all still really popular. All right, so let's jump into Julius Caesar.